The day the new efficiency manager walked in, you could just feel the air change in the warehouse. His name was Chad, and he had that slick corporate smile that never quite reached his eyes. He didn't shake my hand, he just gave me a nod and started talking numbers. He said our longtime supplier, a family-owned business we'd worked with for 15 years, was emotionally attached and not cost-effective. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. These weren't just suppliers. Mike from American Steelworks had been at my kid's graduation party. But Chad didn't care about that. He saw relationships as liabilities. His first move was to switch our raw steel. He found some cut-rate outfit overseas, bragging about saving 12% on material costs. What he didn't factor in was the 3-week shipping delay that halted our entire production line. The steel that finally arrived was subpar, full of impurities that jammed our precision machines. We lost a $40,000 contract because we missed the deadline. Chad just called it an unforeseen market fluctuation. I called it a disaster he ordered himself. Then came the packaging. He axed our local cardboard box supplier, a veteran-owned company right here in Ohio, for a cheaper online distributor. The savings looked great on his spreadsheet. But the first major shipment we sent out, the boxes were so flimsy they collapsed in transit. We had an entire truckload of finished goods damaged beyond repair. The client was furious, and the reputation we'd spent decades building took a direct hit. Chad's solution? He tried to blame it on the shipping company. The audacity was breathtaking. The final straw was the specialty components. He replaced our reliable, slightly more expensive domestic supplier with the absolute lowest bidder he could find. The components failed quality control at a rate of nearly 40% value. The failure wasn't just in the parts, it was in the logic. Chad was so focused on the price tag of each individual piece, he was blind to the massive cost of the delays, the reworks, the furious clients, and the plummeting morale on my shop floor. He was killing us with his so-called efficiency. So I did what any good operations manager would do. I started building my own case. I documented every delay, every failed component, every lost client, and the exact dollar amount it cost us. I didn't deal in Chad's abstract theories. I dealt in the cold, hard facts of broken machines and angry phone calls. I was gathering the evidence to prove that his effective management was actually bankrupting us. Because sometimes the most efficient thing you can do is cut out the cancer before it spreads. What would you have done in my shoes? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for the next part of this story. The day the new efficiency manager walked in, you could smell the corporate jargon from a mile away. He didn't shake hands. He gave a PowerPoint presentation on synergistic optimization. And his first target? Our suppliers. The guys who'd been with us for 20 years. The ones who knew our machines by their first names and would drive through a snowstorm to deliver a crucial part. He called them legacy vendors. I called them the backbone of this company. His grand plan was to replace them with a single massive national distributor. He promised us volume discounts, streamlined logistics, and a unified procurement experience. It sounded so clean on his glossy charts. But I'd been on this factory floor for 3 decades. I knew that streamlined usually means fragile. I tried to tell him. I pulled him aside after one of his meetings and said, "Look, these big box suppliers, their system is built for standard orders. We do custom work. Our guys need specific grades of steel, oddball fittings. They don't keep that stuff in a warehouse in another state." He just smiled, that empty, placid smile, and told me I was resistant to change. He said my local loyalty was an admirable but outdated business model. The changeover happened on a Monday. By Wednesday, we had our first crisis. A rush job for our biggest client required a specialty brass fitting. The old supplier, Pete, would have had it on a truck within the hour. The new national hotline? I was on hold for 45 minutes before a customer service rep in a different time zone told me the part was back-ordered for 3 weeks. 3 weeks! I had to tell the foreman to shut down a whole production line. I saw the look in his eyes, a mix of frustration and "I told you so." The efficiency manager was nowhere to be found, probably in another meeting about efficiency. That's when the real cost of his savings started adding up. It wasn't just the lost hours or the overtime we had to pay to catch up. It was the trust. Our clients started getting nervous. Our quality control team started flagging subpar materials that the new supplier swore were identical specifications. They weren't. We were cutting corners with materials that felt cheap, and it showed in the final product. The manager's spreadsheets were green with projected savings, but the factory floor was turning red with delays and reworks. He was managing numbers on a screen, but he was killing the real, tangible thing that made this company work: its relationships and its reputation. And that's a lesson you can't learn in an MBA program. Have you ever seen a cost-cutting measure actually end up costing more in the long run? Tell me your story in the comments. And if you want to see how this all plays out, make sure you're subscribed. The new guy they brought in, the one with the shiny MBA and a PowerPoint for every conversation, he called it supplier optimization. Said we needed to streamline our vendor relationships and leverage our purchasing power. Corporate buzzwords that sounded smart in a boardroom but meant absolutely nothing on the factory floor. I'd been running procurement for 15 years. I knew our suppliers like I knew the back of my hand. Old man Henderson at Henderson Steel wasn't just a vendor. He was the guy who'd driven a critical shipment across 3 states himself during a blizzard to keep our line running. We had a handshake deal that was stronger than any 100-page contract. But the effective manager didn't care about handshakes. He cared about spreadsheets. He presented his analysis, all colorful graphs and percentages showing how we could save 2% by switching to some massive national supplier. 2%. He talked about economies of scale and centralized logistics like he was reading from a textbook. I tried to tell him. I said, "Look, these guys, they know our specs. They answer the phone at 2 a.m. That 2% you're saving? It'll vanish the first time we get a batch of subpar materials and a production line goes down for 48 hours. He gave me this condescending smile, the kind that says you're a dinosaur who doesn't understand modern business. He said, "Sentimentality has no place in the bottom line." He wasn't just changing suppliers, he was dismantling a network of trust we'd spent over a decade building. The first order from the new supplier was late, not by a day, but by a week. The second shipment had a dimensional tolerance that was just off. Not enough to send it all back, but enough that our machinists had to spend extra hours recalibrating everything, killing our efficiency. And when I tried to call their customer service hub, I was put on hold for 45 minutes only to be told it was a logistical issue and they'd look into it. There was no one to yell at, no one who felt personally responsible. I had to walk onto my production floor and look my team in the eye while they scrambled to fix a problem that never should have existed. All for a theoretical 2% that had already been eclipsed by overtime and delays. The effective manager had already moved on to his next optimization project, his spreadsheet forever green, completely insulated from the real-world chaos he'd created. It's a lesson you can't learn in business school. Sometimes the cheapest option is the most expensive mistake you'll ever make. Ever had a brilliant corporate decision blow up in your face? Tell me about it in the comments. And subscribe for more real stories from the front lines of business. The memo came down on a Tuesday morning, and I remember the chill that went through me when I read it. Strategic Supplier Optimization Initiative. It sounded so corporate, so sterile, but I knew exactly what it meant. Our new effective manager, a guy named Chad, who just transferred from some consulting firm, was about to start swinging an axe. He didn't care about the 20 years my team had spent building relationships with local vendors, the handshake deals that had gotten us through supply chain nightmares, or the fact that our current suppliers were the reason our product quality was the best in the region. All he saw was a spreadsheet, a column of numbers he thought he could shrink. His first move was to replace Henderson's Family Farms, our produce supplier for over a decade. Old man Henderson knew the exact day his peaches would be perfect for our peach cobbler. He'd call me personally. Chad replaced him with a massive national distributor. The first shipment arrived, and the tomatoes were mealy, the lettuce was wilted. It was like they'd been picked by a machine that didn't know what ripe meant. And the cost? After all his talk of efficiency, the invoice was actually 15% higher. When I showed him the side-by-side comparison, he just shrugged and said, "We're standardizing for scale, short-term pain for long-term gain." But the only thing in pain was our reputation. Then he went after our bakery flour. Miller's Mill had been supplying us since my dad ran this place. Their flour was stone ground, and it gave our sourdough a character you just couldn't buy. Chad's new cost-effective supplier provided flour that was bland, uniform, and lifeless. Our first batch of bread came out flat and dense. Customers noticed immediately. We started getting comments, emails. "What happened to the bread?" they'd ask. I had to look them in the eye and lie, telling them we were tweaking the recipe. It felt like a betrayal of everything we stood for. The final straw was the coffee. We sourced our beans from a small family-owned roaster in Washington State. They paid their farmers fair prices, and the quality was exceptional. Chad's replacement was a cheap bitter blend from some anonymous conglomerate. The day we switched, a regular customer, a woman who'd been coming in for her morning latte for 8 years, took one sip, put the cup down, and said, "This tastes like burnt water." She never came back. That's when I knew Chad wasn't just changing suppliers. He was systematically dismantling the soul of our business, one efficient decision at a time. He was trading our legacy for a marginal theoretical gain on a balance sheet he'd probably be leaving behind in a year for his next promotion. And we were the ones left to clean up the mess. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What's the real cost of so-called efficiency? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for the next part of this story. The new guy they brought in, the one with the slicked-back hair and the efficiency expert title, he didn't just want to change the coffee in the break room. No, he wanted to tear out the heart of our operation. He called our suppliers legacy partners. He said they were emotionally expensive. I sat in that boardroom and watched him present his spreadsheets, his colorful graphs showing how much we could save by switching to some cut-rate outfit I'd never heard of. He talked about streamlining the supply chain like he was untangling a garden hose, not dismantling relationships built over 20 years. See, he didn't know that Frank from our parts supplier stayed up all night during the 08 financial crisis to personally drive a truckload of components to our factory so we wouldn't have to shut down a line. That's not a legacy partner. That's a man who saved 100 families from losing their paychecks. The new manager's numbers didn't have a column for that. His projections were clean, sterile, and completely blind to the trust that actually makes a business run. He was playing chess with pieces he didn't understand, and we were all just pawns on his board. So he signed the contracts, he sent the termination emails, and for about 6 weeks everything looked great on paper. The quarterly report was a sea of green. The board was thrilled. Then the first shipment from the new supplier arrived. It was late. The quality was subpar. We had to halt production. Then the next shipment was a complete no-show. No call, no email. When we finally got someone on the phone, they read from a script about unforeseen logistical disruptions. There was no Frank to call. No one who cared if our doors stayed open. The efficiency he'd promised was a ghost, and the real cost was starting to pile up in unfinished orders and furious clients. That's the thing they never teach you in those management seminars. A handshake and 20 years of reliability are worth more than any percentage point you can squeeze from a bottom line. This new guy thought he was managing resources, but he was really burning bridges. And now we're all standing on the wrong side of the river, watching the ashes float away. Have you ever seen a cost-saving measure actually sink a project? Tell me in the comments. And make sure you're subscribed, because the fallout from this decision is a story you won't want to miss. The day the new efficiency manager walked in, you could smell the corporate jargon from a mile away. He had that freshly minted MBA swagger, a PowerPoint presentation that could cure insomnia, and this unnerving habit of calling people human capital. I'd been running our family's manufacturing supply chain for 23 years. I knew our suppliers like I knew the back of my hand. Old man Henderson at the metalworks, who'd hand-deliver a rush order himself if you were in a pinch. Maria over at Precision Components, whose quality control was so tight you could eat off her circuit boards. These weren't just vendors, they were partners. They were the reason we'd survived 3 recessions. Then came the strategic supplier consolidation. That's what he called it in the Monday morning meeting. He stood there with his slick charts and graphs, talking about synergistic cost-saving opportunities and leveraging economies of scale. He was dismantling decades of trust with a laser pointer. He said Henderson's per-unit price was 4% higher than some new bulk supplier out of state. He didn't mention that Henderson had never, not once in 2 decades, missed a delivery window. He said Maria's operation was too boutique. He didn't care that her failure rate was statistically 0. He was looking at spreadsheets, not at the people who actually kept our lights on. The first red flag was a small one. An order of specialized bolts from the new cost-effective supplier. They were supposed to be grade 8, but they stripped under half the torque. We had to halt a whole assembly line for 8 hours. 8 hours of paying skilled workers to stand around. The savings on those bolts evaporated before lunch. I went to his office, showed him the numbers. He just shrugged and said, "That's a one-time variance. We have to look at the macro-level data." He was talking about our company's lifeblood like it was a homework assignment. The real crash came a month later. We were launching our new product line, a huge deal, the new bulk supplier for our main chassis frames. They shipped us a container full of parts that were out of spec. Not even close. We had to scrap the entire first production run. The delay cost us over $200,000 in lost revenue and rush fees to get it fixed. All that macro-level saving he'd promised, wiped out in a single catastrophic failure. The trust I'd spent my career building was gone, replaced by a cheap invoice from a company that didn't know our name. So, what's the lesson here? You can't manage a business on a spreadsheet alone. Real efficiency isn't just about the lowest price on paper. It's about reliability, quality, and partnership. It's about the people who answer the phone at 2 a.m. when a machine goes down. That new manager? He learned the hard way that some costs don't show up in a quarterly report until it's too late. What would you have done in my shoes? Let me know in the comments. And if you've ever had a brilliant idea blow up in your face, hit that subscribe button. I've got plenty more stories where this came from. The day the efficiency expert walked in, you could just feel the temperature drop in the warehouse. He didn't shake anyone's hand, just nodded, his eyes already scanning our setup like he was pricing the fixtures for a liquidation sale. His first strategic initiative was the suppliers. He called it streamlining the supply chain. I called it a bloodbath. For 20 years, we'd worked with folks like Dave from Tri-State Lumber. Dave's dad started the business, and my dad was his first major account. When we had that freak ice storm back in '98 that shut down the entire interstate, Dave personally loaded a flatbed and drove it through the night, chains on his tires, just to get us the plywood we needed to fulfill an order. That's partnership. That's trust. The new guy? He saw that relationship, and all he saw was a line item. He sat me down in his sterile office, pointed to a spreadsheet, and said Dave was cost ineffective. He'd found a new supplier, some massive conglomerate out of state that undercut Dave's price by 3%. I tried to tell him. It's not just about the price per unit, I said. It's about the guy who answers his phone at 2 a.m. when a shipment is short. It's about the quality we can count on. He looked at me like I was speaking a dead language. He said, and I'll never forget this, loyalty is a liability. Data is the only asset. He replaced Dave. He replaced our hardware guy, our paint supplier, our electrical components vendor. He gutted decades of handshake deals and replaced them with purchase orders from faceless corporations. And for about 6 months, his reports looked beautiful. The profit margins on paper were up. He probably got a bonus. But then reality hit. The new cost-effective lumber started warping. The paint batches were inconsistent. And when a truck full of our premium lighting fixtures was delayed by a blizzard in Colorado, do you think our new efficient supplier answered the phone? Of course not. We had to delay a project for a major client, and the penalty clauses kicked in. We lost 10 times what we'd saved on those spreadsheets. The efficiency expert had looked at the numbers, but he never understood the business. He never understood that the most valuable thing in our ledger wasn't a number at all. It was the trust we'd built, one delivery at a time, with people who actually gave a damn. He traded our foundation for a house of cards, and when the wind finally blew, we were the ones left picking up the pieces. It makes you wonder, how many of you have seen a smart decision blow up in your face because it ignored the human element? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more real-world stories about the cost of bad leadership, make sure you're subscribed. The new VP they brought in from some fancy consulting firm called it strategic optimization. I called it a wrecking ball aimed at 20 years of trust. The first email hit my inbox on a Tuesday morning, a cold corporate memo about streamlining our vendor ecosystem. Translation, he was tearing up our contracts with suppliers who'd been with us since my dad ran this division. These weren't just vendors. They were the people who answered their phones at 2 a.m. when a machine broke down, the families who remembered our team's birthdays. And this new guy, with his spreadsheets and his buzzwords, was treating them like disposable parts. His first target was Henderson Metals. Old man Henderson had supplied our aluminum for 30 years. His quality was unmatched. His reliability was legendary. But the new VP didn't care about that. He only saw a line item on a balance sheet. He presented a slick PowerPoint, all charts and graphs, showing how we could save 3% by switching to some bulk distributor out of state. He didn't mention that Henderson had personally driven a replacement shipment through a snowstorm to save a critical project last winter. He didn't understand that the 3% he was saving was a cheap price for the loyalty that kept this company running when things got tough. So I pushed back. I scheduled a meeting. I laid out the history, the data on Henderson's near-perfect delivery record, the intangible value of a partnership built on handshakes and mutual respect. The VP listened with a polite, condescending smile. He said, and I'll never forget this, sentimentality is a tax on progress. He wasn't just changing a supplier, he was dismantling a culture. A week later, the termination notice was sent to Henderson Metals. It was the first domino to fall, and I stood there watching, feeling the foundation of everything we'd built start to crack. It was the moment I realized this wasn't about efficiency. It was about ego. Have you ever had a new boss come in and destroy something that was working perfectly just to prove a point? Tell me in the comments. And if you want to see how this corporate tragedy unfolds, make sure you're subscribed. The new guy, this efficiency expert they brought in from corporate, he called it streamlining. I called it a bloodbath. I'd been working with Frank's Lumber for 15 years. Frank wasn't just a supplier. He was the guy who'd open his yard at 10 p.m. if I had an emergency on a big project. His prices were fair, his wood was quality, and his word was his bond. But the new manager, a kid named Chad, who'd never had sawdust on his own shoes, saw a line item on a spreadsheet. He saw that we could save 3%, a rounding error, by switching to some national mega chain. He didn't see the cost of that 3%. He didn't see that Frank knew the specific grain of the southern yellow pine we needed for custom decks. He didn't see that when the mega chain's truck showed up 2 days late with warped 2x4s, Frank would personally deliver the replacement load himself, no questions asked. Chad saw a number. I saw a partnership built on trust, the kind of thing you can't put on a balance sheet. So he made the call. He sat in his glass office with his ergonomic chair and terminated a 15-year relationship with a 5-minute email. No phone call, no handshake, just a sterile corporate-approved message. I found out when Frank called me, his voice thick with a confusion I'd never heard before. "Jim, what did I do wrong?" he asked me, and I had no answer for him. I just stood there in my own warehouse, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 successful projects that Frank had helped us build, feeling like I'd sold out a member of my own family for a lousy 3%. And you know what the real kicker is? That 3% saving? It vanished within the first month. The delays from the new supplier cost us a penalty on the Jefferson contract. The inferior materials led to more waste and callbacks. We lost more money and reputation alone than we ever saved. Chad had optimized a single line item and blown up the entire engine. It was a masterclass in missing the forest for the trees, a lesson in how not everything that counts can be counted. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many good people get thrown away in the name of efficiency? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you've ever seen a so-called effective manager break something that worked perfectly fine, hit that subscribe button. You won't believe what happened next. The new efficiency expert they brought in from corporate, this slick guy in a suit who'd never gotten his hands dirty in his life, called it strategic realignment. I called it a gut punch. He stood there in our Monday morning meeting with his PowerPoint slides and corporate jargon, telling us our long-standing suppliers, the people who'd bailed us out during the 2020 supply chain chaos, the family-owned businesses that remembered my kids' names, were being replaced. He said it was a necessary upgrade for optimized operational throughput. He was trading our partners, our reliability, for a spreadsheet that promised a 2% cost saving. My team and I exchanged looks across the table. We knew what this meant. We'd lived through this before. The new vendors were cheaper, sure, but they were faceless conglomerates with call centers instead of contacts. I thought about Frank over at our current plastic supplier. Last year, when we had that emergency order for the Johnson account, he drove a truck halfway across the state himself on a Sunday to make sure we had the materials. What was this new efficient supplier going to do? Send us an automated email apology? The so-called expert's plan was a house of cards, and he was too arrogant to see it. His entire strategy was built on perfect conditions. No shipping delays, no quality control issues, no sudden surges in demand. It was a fantasy. In the real world, machines break. Trucks get flat tires. You need suppliers who answer the phone at 2 a.m., not a recorded message telling you your call is important to them. He was sacrificing our company's resilience, the very thing that had kept us alive during tough times, for a number on a balance sheet that would make him look good at the next quarterly review. He wasn't building anything. He was just polishing the exterior while the foundation crumbled. And that's the real cost of efficient management that doesn't understand the business. It trades trust for transaction, partnership for price points. It looks at a 30-year relationship and sees a line item to be minimized. But I'll tell you what I see. I see the future phone call when a critical order is late. And that new supplier says, "It's in the system," while our client walks away for good. That 2% saving won't look so good then, will it? Have you ever seen a short-term decision like this blow up in someone's face? Let me know in the comments. And subscribe, because I'm going to show you exactly what happened next. The new guy, this efficiency expert they brought in from corporate, he didn't just want to see my numbers, he wanted to tear my world apart. He sat in my office, all slicked back hair and a suit that cost more than my car, and he laid out his grand plan. He called it streamlining. I called it a gutting. He was going to drop our local suppliers, the guys I'd had beers with for 20 years, the family businesses that had bailed us out during supply chain nightmares, for some faceless national distributor. He had a spreadsheet that supposedly proved it would save us 12%. 12%. He said it with a straight face, like that number was worth more than the trust we'd spent 2 decades building. I looked at that spreadsheet, and all I saw were the ghosts of handshake deals and promises kept. I saw Frank's face, the owner of our local packaging supplier, who'd driven a truck himself through a blizzard to get us a rush order. I saw Maria, whose small machining shop had taken my call at 2 a.m. more than once. These weren't just vendors on a list, they were partners. They were the reason this plant had stayed open when others had shut down. And this kid in the expensive suit was ready to throw them all away for a theoretical 12% that would probably vanish into some corporate accounting black hole. My hands were clenched under the desk. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't efficiency. This was arrogance. It was sacrificing everything that actually made this place work on the altar of a PowerPoint presentation. He didn't understand that the real cost wasn't on that spreadsheet. The real cost was the loyalty you can't buy, the flexibility you can't quantify, and the community you obliterate with one signature. I knew right then I was staring down a fight, not just for my job, but for the soul of this company. What would you have done in my shoes? Let me know in the comments.